What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
"You're not leading the first dance," my cousin said on the phone, and she said it the way people say something they've already rehearsed with other people. Like there had been a little committee meeting I wasn't invited to where they all nodded and agreed I was not the right fit for the spotlight, and then she added, "You're not important enough," which landed harder than she probably expected because I could hear myself inhale and hold it, the way you do when you know there is no point arguing with someone who enjoys the sound of themselves winning, and even though a part of me wanted to push back and list every reason the request had been hers, not mine, I said fine, do whatever you want. Because I have learned the hard way that arguing with a person who needs to feel above you is like pouring water into a bucket with a hole. It all leaks out, and you are the one left standing there looking foolish while they smile. What you should know, if we are being honest like friends over coffee, is that this was not about dancing or music or wedding rules. This was about a long line of small cuts that never healed because everyone kept pretending they were jokes or tradition. Or just the way family is, and I played along for years because it was easier to swallow it than to fight every single time, and besides, I left for the military and that gave people an easy label for me, the one who ran off, the one who thinks she is better, the one who will not settle down and be reasonable, and it is funny because when you are actually doing the work, when you are gone for months and you come back with a sense of discipline and a cleared debt and a calmer head, some people cannot handle it, they reduce you to a caricature that fits their comfort. My cousin Lily has always needed to feel central, and I say that without malice, because I understand where it comes from. A mother who measured worth in attention, a father who rewarded charm more than effort. A tiny stage built in a living room every holiday where the kids performed for applause, and some of us learned to clap and move along while Lily learned that applause is almost the same thing as love, so by the time we reached adulthood the habit had hardened. And any room she entered quietly rearranged itself around her the way chairs scrape in a hall before a speech, and I knew that walking into her wedding I was supposed to play a part, which I can do, I am not new at this. But I did not expect the line she decided to draw would be so blunt and so proud of itself. The first dance had been my idea months ago, and it was not grand or dramatic, just a way to honor our grandmother who taught us both the basics in the living room when we were teenagers. And I thought we could start the reception with a short moment in her memory. Just a verse, nothing long, nothing theatrical, a quiet nod before the party took over. And when I pitched it, Lily smiled and said she loved it because it would make people cry in a good way and the photographer could get beautiful shots, and I thought we were aligned. But what I did not understand then was that she liked the idea as long as she could place herself at the center of it, and the second she realized the focus might tilt even slightly toward me, even for a breath, even for a beat, she changed the rules and told herself it was necessary. When she said I was not important enough, I think she expected me to plead my case or to explain how wrong she was about what I do and who I am, yet the truth is I was tired. Truly tired in the way you get when a pattern repeats so many times it becomes a wallpaper you do not notice until someone switches the lights and the print slaps you in the face, and I decided in that moment I would not explain anything, I would not argue, and I would not give her the fuel she was looking for, because some people only feel certain when you fight them, and they will keep poking you until you swing, and the only way to win is to let them punch air. After I hung up, I sat with the words in my kitchen and tried to measure how much of my anger was about this one wedding and how much was about years of being told in all kinds of ways that my value depended on how well I stayed in a lane that other people drew for me. And I realized it was not the dance that stung, it was the declaration that my importance had to be graded by her committee, and if I am being completely candid, something in me shifted right then, not loudly, not with fists, but with the calm that shows up when you finally accept that you do not need permission to be who you are, you only need the right moment and the right level of nerve. I called no one, I texted no one, I did not go on a rant, because I have learned that when you announce your plan it becomes a group project and people start editing it, reducing it, complicating it, turning it into a compromise that satisfies the least brave person in the room, so I let the silence do the work while I went about my routine and packed my bag for the trip and handled my duties. And every time I thought about that first dance I saw my grandmother's patient face in my head and heard her telling me to keep my back straight and my chin up and to lead with intention, and I knew there was a way to honor her that did not require an invitation from Lily. A few days later, Lily sent a cheerful group message with logistics and dress code and a little reminder about staying in your lane, though she did not use those words. And it made me smile because I recognize the tone you use when you have stacked the deck and you want to make sure everyone knows the rules you wrote, and I tapped a simple reply that I would be there, and I was happy for her, and I hoped she had the day she wanted. And that was true, I did want her to have the day she wanted, but I also wanted something else, something she did not see coming because she never looks for things outside the spotlight. If you are waiting for the part where I broke down and begged my way back into her program, you are going to be disappointed, because what I did instead was breathe, and think, and put together a plan that did not require her approval, did not ruin her wedding, and did not crawl down to the level of petty, a plan that would not humiliate anyone but would make a point so clean and so undeniable that once it happened there would be no debate about who was important and who got to decide it. And that was the moment, sitting alone with a calm cup of coffee and a phone that had finally stopped buzzing, when I decided she would not control the ending of the story, and I would choose my timing, and when the music started, I would be ready. Because I knew exactly how to walk onto that floor without saying a single word and change the room in a way she could not undo. If I trace the line back, the thing that felt like a simple wedding rule was really one more entry in a long ledger of moments that I let slide, because arguing with family can turn a kitchen into a courtroom and a birthday into a trial. And since I was the one who left for service and missed holidays and came home at odd times with a schedule that never matched theirs, I became the flexible one who could be moved, seated at the end of the table, cropped out of group photos because someone else's hair looked better in that frame, told to keep it light because my work made people uncomfortable, and while I tell you this without bitterness, because I do not live there, I need you to understand that Lily has always been the kind of person who can feel a room like a thermostat and turn the dial to a setting that suits her mood. So when she called and said I was not important enough for the first dance, it was not a shock. It was a confirmation that the setting had never included me. At a comfortable temperature. I thought about our grandmother, the one who taught us the basic steps in the living room with the television low and the furniture pushed back just enough for small circles, and how she used to say that a good lead is not about yanking someone around. It is about signaling with confidence so the other person always knows where the floor is, and maybe because I had been trained to keep my shoulders down and my breathing steady when things get tense, the memory settled me, and I realized that Lily's sentence had given me a kind of freedom, because when someone tells you that you cannot be central in their story, they also release you to write your own, and no one can punish you for not following a script you never agreed to. I met up with my friend Mara that week, the one who has known me long enough to recognize the tell in my face when I am done being polite, and I told her the wedding line and the exact words, and she blinked and asked me if I wanted a hug or a plan. And I said both, but make the plan first because the hug can wait, and we sat there with 2 mugs cooling on the table while she asked me to say out loud what would feel like justice without turning me into someone I would not recognize the next morning, and it was such a clear question that it broke something open, because what I wanted was not public humiliation, not a scene, not a ruined day. I wanted a moment that rebalanced the scale without spilling anything on the dress, a move so clean that no one could lie about what they had just witnessed. We talked logistics in the plain way adults do when they have bills and calendars and supervisors, and I admitted that the uniform had been hanging in my closet pressed and ready because I was supposed to attend a ceremony the following week. And Mara tilted her head and asked if I had considered the simple math of attention, which is that certain symbols have weight whether or not people are comfortable with them, and that maybe the point was not to grab a microphone or deliver a speech but to let a single choice speak for itself, and the more we sketched the idea, the more I could feel my anger cooling into something steadier and more focused, which is always when I trust myself the most. There were family politics to navigate, of course, because my aunt would have turned this into an indictment of my manners if I did anything that could be called rude, and my mother, who loves me in a way that sometimes looks like constant worry, would have tried to soften it and ask me to be the bigger person, so I decided to keep it quiet, not because I was ashamed of the plan, but because secrecy protects intent from 1,000 edits, and also because secrecy would spare them the anxiety of imagining disasters that were never going to happen, since the whole point was to let Lily have her wedding while I reclaimed exactly 1 inch of space that had been marked off limits. I started making small, boring arrangements that would look like nothing to anyone else, and if you have ever set up something delicate, you know that the tiny details are what make the hinge work. So I confirmed my leave and the travel times. I checked the schedule Lily had sent with her tidy bullet points and noticed the exact wording about the first dance, which said it would be announced by the DJ and the floor would be cleared, and I smiled because rules like that always assume compliance. They never imagine someone stepping forward with calm authority and changing the atmosphere without raising a voice, and I decided that my entry would be at the beat between announcement and music, in the quiet edge where people inhale because the next thing is about to happen, which is exactly when you can teach a room what to pay attention to. There were still the echoes of old resentment to manage, the little comments that leak out when people feel brave in groups, and I got a preview at a family dinner the week before the wedding when Lily, glowing from the rehearsal and the fittings and the toasts, made a joke about how some people think training makes them special when really it just makes them rigid, and the table laughed that polite laugh you hear when everyone wants the moment to pass without conflict, and I felt the old urge to push back rise like a reflex. Then I let it fall because you cannot outtalk someone who needs to be cheered by their own audience, and what I had in my pocket was not a comeback, it was timing. Mara texted me that night to ask if I was still steady, and I told her I was more than steady, I was patient, and I said that the best part about a plan like this is that it does not ask permission and it does not beg forgiveness. It simply exists and makes other people adjust, and she sent me a simple line about remembering to breathe and to keep my chin level, not high, because pride looks better at level, and I promised I would do exactly that. Then I put my phone down and packed the last necessary item with the same care I use for anything that matters, making sure everything was in order because I knew there would be no second take. I went to bed with the kind of calm that comes from deciding who you are before anyone else gets a vote, and when I woke up I kept my routine and answered Lily's chipper messages with kindness that was not performative, because I did want her to enjoy the day she had built, and I meant it, while also knowing that a single moment could live inside that day like a quiet fuse that would not burn anything down, only light the truth. And by the time I finished my coffee I had stopped calling it a plan and started calling it an appointment with myself, set for the exact second the DJ asked the room to clear for the first dance, because that was where the hinge would turn, and that was where I would be standing. The week leading up to the wedding moved in that peculiar slow motion where every errand looks ordinary to anyone watching, yet inside your head each small choice clicks into place like a lock you have memorized by touch. And while the family passed around rehearsal reminders and hair appointments and last-minute seating swaps, I kept my answers cheerful and brief, because it cost me nothing to be pleasant while I was quietly stacking pieces that would look innocent from every angle until the exact second they touched each other and made sense, which is the only way to build something that cannot be spun or watered down later by people who prefer a version of events that flatters them. The first practical step was boring on purpose, because boring is invisible, so I confirmed my leave without any story attached to it. I pressed my uniform and left it folded in a garment bag that looked like everyone else's garment bag. I checked the venue map Lily had posted and noticed the side corridor near the service door that connected to the ballroom just behind the DJ booth, and I called the venue manager with a simple respectful request to confirm that an active duty guest in dress uniform could enter the ballroom through that corridor when the floor was being cleared, not to interrupt, not to make a scene, just to avoid traffic near the families and the manager, who sounded like a person who enjoys things running on time, thanked me for planning ahead and made a note to brief the staff without looping anyone else in, which was exactly the kind of quiet cooperation I counted on from people who value order more than gossip. Next, I reached out to the DJ, not with a dramatic announcement or a demand, but with the calm tone of someone solving a logistics question, and I asked whether the first dance track had a short instrumental intro or began right on the beat. And he told me there was a brief count-in and that the plan was to lower the lights as the floor cleared, then bring them up when the couple stepped forward. And I said that was helpful, and I thanked him and asked him to do me the favor of playing one short clip as a dedication later in the night for our grandmother, the same simple melody she had used to teach us the basics, and he said he would be honored, especially because the slideshow already had her photo cued for a later moment. And I smiled because I had not known about the slideshow, and sometimes the world hands you a clean line without realizing it. Mara and I met for a quick check-in where she did her usual thing of pressing me to remove every piece that could look like cruelty, and I appreciated it even though I already knew the answer. Because if there is one lesson the uniform burns into you, it is that power without control is just noise, and I wanted no noise. I wanted a moment that changed the temperature of the room in a way that made people breathe different, so we walked through the timing. The path from corridor to floor, the posture, the way I would wait until the DJ's announcement ended, the beat of quiet when people inhale, the simple step forward without any gesture that could be read as a challenge. And she nodded and said it would land because it would be undeniable without being aggressive, which is the hardest balance to hold when you are mad for good reasons. There was still the matter of family optics, because the easiest way to discredit a woman who refuses to play small is to hang rudeness on her like a sign. So I did one more thing that was both practical and strategic. And I called the venue to extend the open bar by 1 hour as my gift, with a printed note for the rehearsal dinner that said it was in our grandmother's honor because she believed in keeping people fed and cared for when they gathered. And I paid the invoice on the spot, so there was nothing for anyone to approve. Then I sent Lily a simple message that my gift was handled and I hoped it took something off her plate, and if that sounds like a sweet move, let me be honest and say it also served a second purpose, because the rehearsal toast would now include my name whether or not Lily liked it, and the room would have to hold me as a contributor rather than an afterthought. At the rehearsal dinner, Lily did exactly what I expected, which was to give a tidy speech about gratitude and teamwork while skimming past my name like a flat stone on water, but the manager stepped in with the detail about the extra hour. And there it was again, that delicate change in the air when people recalibrate their picture of you, and Lily's smile tightened a fraction and then reset, and I kept my face relaxed and my tone warm, and I hugged her because the hug cost me nothing, while inside, I quietly recorded the look on a few relatives who had learned to parrot her ranking system and were now forced to square it with a gesture that benefited everyone, and that small win tasted clean because it gave no one a bruise yet still told the truth. That night, I laid the uniform across the chair in my room and practiced the walk, not for the sake of drama, but to burn the calm into my muscles so that it would show even if my heart ran hot, and I ran the plan again from the top, the corridor. The hinge of silence between the DJ's words and the music, the way my shoes would sound against the floor, the way I would not speak, because speaking would hand the narrative back to anyone who wanted to debate my motives, and I reminded myself that the most effective message is often the one delivered without commentary, since commentary invites disputes and a posture invites acceptance. Before I slept, I made one last adjustment to the evening that would turn a quiet knife in a velvet sheath, which was to text Mara the exact line I wanted her to say if Lily tried to spin my presence into some story about me stealing attention. And the line was simple and non-negotiable, that our grandmother would have loved to see both of us honored and that I had extended the bar in her name, and that families do not shrink people who have served them, and we left it there, ready but not needed. Unless the conversation went sideways, because I believe in layered safety, and I believe in giving people every chance to choose grace before you box in their excuses. And with all of that said, with the bow tied so quietly you would not see it unless you were looking for it, I closed my eyes with the comfort that comes from knowing the first small chapter of justice had already happened at the rehearsal without a raised voice or a single sharp edge, and the next chapter would not ask anyone for permission. Because the next chapter would be a doorway I walked through at the exact second the room breathed in, and when it exhaled, the shape of the night would be different. The morning of the wedding arrived with that steady hum of logistics that always makes people behave like air traffic controllers even when all they are doing is herding relatives from one room to another, and I kept myself folded into the background on purpose, answering messages quickly, showing up where I was asked, and never giving Lily a reason to decide I was a variable she needed to manage, because the less I waved, the more room I had to move, and I wanted a clean path later without anyone saying I had been disruptive or dramatic, which is why I chose a simple dress for the ceremony and stood with the cousins while the photos were taken and smiled when the photographer told us to. And if anyone was waiting for me to bristle or look unhappy, they did not get that satisfaction, since nothing kills a narrative faster than refusing to play the part you have been assigned. I checked the corridor twice before the reception began, once during cocktail hour when the staff were moving trays, and once more as guests found their seats, and both times it looked exactly the way I needed it to look, undecorated and ignored. And I felt that small click I have come to trust, the one that tells you the environment is going to cooperate because you prepared with respect rather than force, and after that I focused on being a model guest, because generosity smooths edges and makes people rethink old habits. So I helped an older aunt find her table. I traded seats with a cousin's pregnant friend so she would not have to walk far. And when Lily did her rounds greeting people with that high-wired smile that says the day has finally started to feel real, I hugged her and told her she looked happy and that the room was beautiful and the planning had obviously paid off. And I could feel her relax because I was not there to steal anything from her, at least not anything she cared to name. The first small justice of the day came during the toasts, which were tidy and carefully planned, because Lily likes to script out gratitude so it will not wander into places she cannot control. And when her father finished thanking vendors and friends, he did the gracious thing and thanked the family for traveling and for pitching in, and he glanced over the list Lily had given him and somehow still managed to miss my contribution, which would have slipped by as usual if the venue manager had not stepped up to the microphone and added in his crisp tone that the open bar extension was a gift from me in honor of our grandmother, and that they were grateful, and the room did that subtle shift where eyes find you for a beat. And I kept my face easy and my hands still, and Lily said thank you into the microphone with a smile that felt a little too tight, and that was enough for me because it reminded the room I was a giver and not a problem, which matters when you are about to make a move that people will try to label after the fact. The slideshow for our grandmother came later, tucked between courses, and it was tender and restrained, and when the short melody played underneath, the same one I had asked the DJ to have ready, I watched the faces I love soften at the memories, and I let myself feel a clean thread of grief for the woman who taught us both how to move through a room without knocking into people even when your heart is pounding, and that moment calmed me again, because nothing about what I was doing was about showing off. It was about standing where I had been told I could not stand and doing it with the kind of respect she would have recognized, and if anyone tried to twist it, I could live with that, but I was not going to twist it for them. I stayed far from the head table when the staff began clearing space for the first dance, because the whole point was not to intrude early or to force a confrontation, and instead I slipped away with the casual pace of someone finding a restroom, then turned down the service hall where the ambient noise dropped enough for me to hear my own footsteps, and I unzipped the garment bag and put on the uniform with the practiced care of habit, checking each piece without hurry, because the most respectful thing you can do when wearing something that stands for your work and your promises is to treat it like those promises are still alive, and when it was on, I did not admire myself or psych myself up. I simply breathed, rolled my shoulders once, and felt the line from the floor through my spine, which is how you hold a room without raising your voice. Back in the corridor, a staff member gave me a small nod I recognized as readiness, and the DJ's voice carried through the crack of the door, cheerful and warm as he asked everyone to clear the floor for the couple's first dance. And there was that little collective rustle as chairs moved and conversations paused, and I waited for the words to end because walking before the sentence landed would be aggression while walking after it landed would be intention, and I am old enough to know the difference matters, especially in a family that likes to pretend tone is everything until they need to ignore tone to defend themselves. What I was not prepared for, and maybe this is the part that made the move sweeter than I expected, was the small detour Lily tried to pull at the last second. Because she signaled to the DJ to add a line about her parents starting the dance with them for the first few bars, a small rewrite meant to make sure the center stayed locked on her, which made me smile, not because I wanted to block her parents, who have their own complicated kindness, but because it confirmed that she still believed Everything could be redirected by adding conditions, and I stood there and let the thought pass through me like wind. Then I stepped forward exactly as planned, not hurrying, not slowing. And the staff member opened the side door with a motion so smooth it felt inevitable, and I walked onto the cleared floor while the room inhaled. If you are looking for shouting, you will not find it here, because there was none, only that single bright moment where sound bends around attention, and you can feel hundreds of eyes pivot as if they are one body. And the DJ's music stumbled as his hand hesitated, and a hush moved through the space like someone had lowered a fader, and I did not look at Lily or her parents or anyone else. I kept my gaze level and my steps even. And I reached the center of the floor and turned to face the place where the couple would enter, and I did not say a word, because the point had already landed, and the revenge for this chapter was simple and unmistakable. For the first time in a long time, my presence alone rewrote the program without breaking it, and no one could pretend they did not see it. When I reached the center of the floor and the room inhaled the way a crowd does when something unplanned but undeniable has entered the script, I felt that particular stillness that shows up only when people have to decide in real time whether to cling to a rule or to recognize a truth, and while the DJ's finger hovered and the opening bar stuttered, I kept my posture easy and my face neutral because the point was never to storm anything. The point was to stand exactly where I had been told I did not belong and let the weight of that choice speak louder than any announcement, and in that pause I saw the quick math flicker across faces. The relatives who have always watched Lily for cues unsure where to place their eyes. The out-of-town friends reading the room and looking for leadership. The photographer stepping a fraction to the side because a good photographer knows when the story has shifted and will not shift back. Lily came toward me with the kind of smile that shows teeth and caution at the same time, the groom 2 steps behind because he has always been kind, but careful not to upset the choreography she lives by, and before she could speak the DJ, who had the timeline printed in big bright letters, cleared his throat and said he had a short dedication, a single verse for our grandmother whose photo had just been on the screen, and he thanked me for the open bar in her honor, and he said he would play the little teaching melody for a few measures before returning to the couple's song, and he asked everyone to stay exactly where they were, which was his way of saying this was part of the program now, and the staff, who understand authority when they hear it, nodded almost imperceptibly, and the music that belonged to our childhood rose up in that room and settled the temperature, and for a second even Lily stopped performing and just stood there listening, because whatever else you say about family, the sound of it can still find your ribs. I did not deliver a speech because speeches invite rebuttals and I was not taking questions. I simply lifted one hand at the edge of that tune, palm open, not to command anything but to make a lane. And I said one calm sentence that carried without a microphone because silence does half the work, that this was for our grandmother who taught us both, one verse, and then the night belonged to the bride and groom. And I swear you could feel the collective relief move through the guests because they understood the boundaries without anyone getting scolded, and in that clear framework I turned to Lily and offered the simplest step that needed no instruction. The first pattern our grandmother drilled into us when we tripped over each other in a living room where no one was trying to be famous, and I held the space without touching her, which was its own message, because control is not always hands. Sometimes it is the option to join or to refuse and to let the room watch which one you choose. For a second Lily looked at me with the old calculation, trying to measure whether agreeing would make her smaller or bigger, whether refusing would keep the spotlight or scorch it, and then the groom, who has always been more decent than people give him credit for, took her hand lightly and said that our grandmother would have liked this, and the tension broke just enough for Lily to step beside me, not into my arms, not into any pose that would let her claim later that I had forced a tableau, but into a respectful parallel where the meaning was obvious and the ego had nowhere to hide, and we moved through exactly those few measures, nothing fancy, nothing that could be clipped and spun as a stunt, 2 women and 1 memory stitched to a song. And when the verse ended I stepped back first, gave the room to them entirely, and nodded to the DJ, who recovered like a pro and brought up their track as if it had been written that way from the start. The applause that followed was not loud and wild, it was steady and approving, the kind of applause that signals a decision has been made about what just happened. And as the couple began their dance for the cameras, I returned to the edge of the floor the same way I had come, level and quiet, and in that walk I heard the whispers shift from the old story to the new one. Not hero worship, not scandal, just a simple consensus that what had been done was right and proportionate, and that the person who had been labeled not important had just solved a problem with grace that did not ask for permission. And I will tell you plainly that it landed exactly as I intended, because people accept a reordering when it is clean and does not demand an apology from them for believing the earlier version. After the song, during the predictable swirl of congratulations and champagne, small pockets of truth found me the way they do when the dust settles and people feel safe to adjust their loyalties. My uncle with the careful manners shaking my hand and saying he had misread me for years and appreciated the way I held that moment. A cousin who has always repeated Lily's lines, hugging me a little too long because she is quick to follow any new current. The venue manager giving me a tiny nod that meant the plan had been visible to those who care about order, and even the DJ leaning over with a grin to say he would remember that transition for the rest of his career because it changed the energy without breaking the room. And all of that mattered less than the quiet thing I felt in my own chest, which was that the story I tell myself about myself had been corrected in public and no one could whisper it back into a smaller shape. Lily found me near the service hall later, not to explode because the moment for that had passed, but to test the edges of a new boundary, and she said something about me making a point and about not loving surprises. And I told her that I do not love insults and that I had kept it clean for her day, one verse for our grandmother, and then the floor back to her. And I let the sentence hang there until she nodded, because there was nothing to argue against without admitting the original line out loud, and the groom softened it with a thank you that felt real, and I accepted it because he had earned that much by choosing respect when it counted, and then we stood for a beat in a truce that was not friendship but not war either, which is often the exact territory where families can function. If you are waiting for the part where she apologizes and we cry and declare a new era, that did not happen, and I did not need it to happen, because apologies inside a pattern often come wrapped in future conditions. And I did not build this night around extracting anything from her. I built it to put down a marker that would stand whether or not she ever learned how to share space, and that is the difference between revenge that rots and revenge that breathes. One needs the other person's humiliation to stay alive while the other sits there quietly rewriting the map, and I wanted the map rewritten so that the next time someone tried to assign me to the edge of my own family, I could point to tonight and let the room answer for me. On my way out, after the bouquet and the last round of photos and the small talk that always drifts toward rides and babysitters and early flights, Mara pressed a folded card into my palm that contained nothing except the line we had rehearsed and never used. And she laughed under her breath and said the best part of a plan like this is the piece you never have to fire. And I agreed, because the final move had landed without sharp corners, and as I stepped into the hall I felt that ordinary, tired satisfaction you get after doing something hard with control, and I did not look back to check who was watching because the check had already cleared, the room had already decided. And the title I had been denied had been awarded by the only judge who matters in the end, which is the version of me who can look in a mirror the next morning without negotiating with regret.